BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. On Fridays this year, I've been talking to you guys about D.B. Cooper, the man responsible for the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. aviation history. And in this episode, I will be examining the suspect, Kenneth Peter Christensen. He is a suspect that doesn't require a very big introduction to people who closely follow the D.B. Cooper mystery, but I'll provide some background information about him all the same. Firstly, D.B. Cooper boarded a plane in 1971. It was on Thanksgiving Eve, November 24th of that year. He had what appeared to have been a bomb in a briefcase, and he demanded $200,000 in ransom money and 4 parachutes. And ultimately, D.B. Cooper jumped out the back staircase and into the night, and was never seen or heard from again. Well, that's the official narrative, but some people believe that they have identified D.B. Cooper. Other people had very strong suspicions, and one of them was named Lyle Christensen. His brother, Kenny Christensen, was born in 1926, and he passed away in 1994. After Kenny passed away, Lyle believed that his brother was D.B. Cooper, and he began to put some of the clues together, and he became one of the proponents of not only this theory, but accusing his family member of being the real D.B. Cooper. And firstly, I want to give a certain amount of fairness to these types of observations, because David Kaczynski, the brother of Ted Kaczynski, became very instrumental in the catching of the Unabomber. He was able to recognize certain pieces of language in the Unabomber's writing and began to think, hey, that's my brother Ted Kaczynski. And yes, indeed, Ted Kaczynski was the Unabomber. So it is not an impractical method to recognize certain things about someone who is a family member. And this happens all the time when people are able to connect the dots in a certain way. Sometimes they're wrong, and sometimes they're right. But Kenny Christensen is a different type of D.B. Cooper suspect because he was a flight attendant, and not a lot of D.B. Cooper suspects worked that profession. And not only was Kenny Christensen a flight attendant, he was a flight attendant for Northwest Orient Airlines, the airline that was skyjacked by D.B. Cooper. Although it was not a route that would have been normally traveled by Kenny Christensen, he worked more with the Asian flights, as I understand, and I would cite the interviews with Bruce Smith on this, that Northwest Orient, hence the name, would fly to places like Manila and Tokyo, and the flight that D.B. Cooper skyjacked was going from Portland to Oregon. Now, when you go back and listen to the early episodes of Cooper Friday, you'll hear me talking about some of the suspects like Joe Lakich and Walter Recca, and what I said in the Joe Lakich episode was, I was just extremely conflicted. Every piece of evidence I heard was like, hey, that's a good point, and wait a second, that's a crackpot point. And with the case of Walter Recca as a D.B. Cooper suspect, I went in with an enormous amount of enthusiasm thinking, there's this recorded confession of someone admitting to being D.B. Cooper, and then I ended up just thinking, no way, absolutely not. Walter Recca still in my mind is a bottom-of-the-barrel suspect. With Kenny Christensen, things are somewhere in the middle of those two, because with every piece of evidence that is put forward, I'm about 50-50 on it, because it seems like it should make sense. But as I said, it's only about 50% making sense. The other 50% is a cause for concern, it's room for doubt. The reasons why you should challenge the pieces of evidence that have been put forward. Okay, D.B. Cooper was on the plane, and by Ross Richardson's analysis in the book Still Missing, he states that D.B. Cooper displayed an intimate knowledge of aircrafts, and I agree with that, based on how and why D.B. Cooper is operating. He is somebody who has shown that he understood a lot about how airplanes functioned. For example, he said that he wanted the plane to fly at 10,000 feet. He wanted the landing gear down. And this is one thing that I heard in, the video, I think it was on the Cooper Vortex, where D.B. Cooper was even able to identify where the oxygen tanks were on the plane, like the emergency oxygen tanks. And these are things that a flight attendant would be very well aware of. But D.B. Cooper also made certain mistakes. Firstly, after the plane landed in Seattle and he was able to get the $200,000 in the parachutes, he wanted the plane to take off with the aft staircase down. That is a mistake, and he wanted the plane to fly to Mexico, but a plane that size didn't have enough fuel to fly to Mexico, so they agreed on the stopover in Reno, Nevada. These are things that maybe a flight attendant would not be aware of because he was a flight attendant and not a pilot. Now, to be fair to Kenny Christensen, he was a purser as well, and when we hear the term purser, we think about carrying money, and it appears that that is a job that the purser would do, but the purser is also viewed as the head flight attendant, and he or she would have been someone who would do a lot of administrative duties like keeping logbooks and so on, and people would report to the purser. It was an administrative and managerial role as well, to a certain extent. But with Kenny Christensen, he began working for the airlines in 1954, and at that point he would have spent 17 years working with the Northwest Orient Airlines for 17 years working as a flight attendant. And when D.B. Cooper was on the plane, he stated that he didn't have a grudge against the airline, he just had a grudge. And I don't know if D.B. Cooper intended for that to be some type of crystal ball that people could just look into and see what they wanted, but a lot of people wonder why D.B. Cooper would have made that statement. And the proponents of a theory involving Kenny Christensen would be that he was lying and that he actually did have a grudge against the airline. And he would have had that because he would have been trying to get work, but there are airline strikes. He goes in to report for work saying there's nothing this week, or sometimes even being put out of work for 3 weeks. And that would have been rather frustrating. Kenny Christensen is the subject of the book Into the Blast by Skip Porteous and Robert Blevins. And last year on Black Box Online Radio, I had the opportunity to interview Jeremy Berthume. He is a Zodiac researcher, but he also has Kenny Christensen as his D.B. Cooper suspect. We did some Zodiac Killer interviews, but we also did a Kenny Christensen interview, which I invite you to listen to. And I would even cite some of the observations that Jeremy made during that interview. He heavily used Skip Porteous and Robert Blevins' book as, by his own admission, a theory that he endorsed, but he made some of his own original observations as well. And that becomes the heart and soul motive for Kenny Christensen to commit the skyjacking. He was mad at the airlines. He was mad about not getting the work that he wanted, and after giving 17 years of service, just feeling like he was cheated and getting the short end of the stick. But I've noticed that from listening to the proponents of the Kenny Christensen theory that I've just listed off, they primarily state that D.B. Cooper's motive would have been financial, that he was trying to get the $200,000 and actually use it. And this will tie into a theory that Kenny Christensen would use the $200,000 to purchase a house, or that maybe he even put it into his bank account. And I absolutely disagree with this. And maybe it's a little too early for the counter-arguments, but I just think that that is incorrect for the following reason. The money was not documented to have been found in circulation to the best of our knowledge. And if he had purchased a house with this or put it in the bank, I believe that some way, somehow, red flags would have been going off. Red flags would have been triggering things that the money was back in circulation. And I think the only way that that could have actually worked was that there was some type of myth going around that the serial numbers on the bills were actually documented to the extent that they were. I mean, if what the media says is true, and if what law enforcement says is true, the serial numbers on the bills that D.B. Cooper had were documented. And if they were able to identify $5,800 that were found at Tina Bar in 1980, it seems like they were documented. So I don't think that Kenny Christensen successfully committed the skyjacking and that he would have spent the money on a house or on anything, or even just put it in the bank and left it as part of his estate. Now, Kenny Christensen did go on to purchase a house, and I think that, this goes without saying. I mean, I heard it on Drew Beeson's channel, to just cite the source, that it turned out that that was done with a promissory note, and giving a shout out to Anthony R.R. Mills as well. He runs a very good YouTube channel, and he's a longtime friend of the show. On his channel, he even put the promissory note document up on the screen saying this is how Kenny Christensen was able to do that. And this will bring us to some other pieces of evidence about Kenny Christensen being D.B. Cooper, because what I think is so much more fascinating to hear from people like Jeremy, as I said, as well as Skip Porteous and Robert Blevins, is how D.B. Cooper could have committed the skyjacking, because as I was listening back to my interview with Jeremy, I was just thinking, no matter whom your suspect is, I think the analysis is very valuable, and that is that D.B. Cooper's on the plane, and after he has the $200,000, the briefcase with the bomb, and the 4 parachutes, he jumps out the back aft staircase, and he has a parachute that he wouldn't have been able to steer or maneuver very well. Maybe a little bit of steering and maneuvering, but the reason why he chose that parachute was it was because what he was more familiar with. It was the older parachute, the older option, and this is what he would have used if he were in the military. Kenny Christensen enlisted in the army, or I should say he enlisted in the military, in 1944 during World War II. But he didn't see a lot of frontline action because by 1945 the World War was over. The war ended. So he sent to Japan and he did training jumps, from what I recall, but he did not really go and do a lot of missions because the war ended. So he had paratrooping experience, and maybe he chose that parachute because he was more familiar with it, and it was something that he recognized, and that is a little bit of a reiteration from the sources that I've already cited, but also putting a few connecting dots there and giving some liberties to the hypothesis. Then, once D.B. Cooper is out of the plane, again, no matter whom your suspect is, he could have used the lights of a city as a guiding marker, becoming familiar with the nearest towns, in even Portland, Oregon. If he was able to recognize any particular lights from Portland to the south, then he would have known that direction is south, and the other direction toward Vancouver would have been north. And then that was how he was able to use the Columbia River as a landing, so that D.B. Cooper would have had a vehicle stationed somewhere nearby, and that was the ultimate plan, and the ultimate reason to go to Tina Bar. If you go back and listen to my interview with Jeremy Berthium, he actually stated that the drop zone was right over Tina Bar, and that would have been the place where he believes D.B. Cooper landed, and I know it's a place that seems rather unusual, and some of the possible landing places that I've talked about on this channel before are the Lewis River, or maybe he landed in a place like directly in the water of the Columbia River. Some people think Lake Merwin, but Jeremy believed that he landed at Tina Bar, and this would become important because, as previously stated, in 1980, 3 bundles of bills worth about $5,800, or worth $5,800, were found at Tina Bar. And when I was reading Ross Richardson's book, and as well as listening to his interview on the Cooper Vortex, he stated that there was no other explanation for how that money should have landed at Tina Bar, except for the fact that in 1974 there was a dredge. They dredged up the bottom of the river, and that the sand and the dirt ended up at Tina Bar, and that's how it got there, meaning that the bills were in the Columbia River first, and they were dredged and secured at Tina Bar. Now, somebody like Jeremy Berthium, as well as perhaps countless other people out there, believe that that's not what happened. The reason why the money was found in 1980 was because it was specifically planted there. Even if you get on generic D.B. Cooper videos online, like from the Infographics channel and so on, they will propose theories like that the bills were specifically planted at Tina Bar. And, for example, Jeremy just said he thought he did it, but by he, I mean D.B. Cooper did it to commemorate the jump, just returning several years later with $5,800 from money that he knew he couldn't spend, so he just did it to mark the site, and maybe somebody would find it. And that theory is as good as any, because I've noticed that there's a very big divide. Some people believe that the money came from the river, and other people believe that somebody planted it directly. And right now I would like to turn it over to you. What do you think happened? How did those bundles of bills, $5,800, end up at Tina Bar? Please put your idea in the comment section down below. And you can also hit the like button and subscribe if you want to follow along with all of these Cooper Friday episodes. I also do a segment about the Zodiac Killer every Monday called Zodiac Monday, one about Jack the Ripper on Wednesday, Ripper Wednesday, and you're listening to Cooper Friday here. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go through some of the links in the description box. One of them is for Buy Me a Coffee buymeacoffee.com. Buymeacoffee.com/blackboxnid88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And in addition to the regularly scheduled lineup, I am also the writer of the White Horse Killer Saga. The first book was called Killer on a White Horse, A Story of the Evening Watchman, the second was Down the Dark Lane, and the third one was White Horse Strong. And just now, I am finally able to tell you that I have started the fourth story in the White Horse Killer Saga, and that will be released on YouTube in audiobook format, so please stay tuned. One more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe if you want to follow along with all of these discussions as well as the audiobooks. Lots of content here on Black Box Online Radio, and I've done one interview with Jeremy Berthium, as I said, discussing his observations about D.B. Cooper, but we also did a follow-up, which was a Q&A session talking about both D.B. Cooper and the Zodiac, and I invite you guys to check out a lot of the content here on Black Box Online Radio if you're curious about different perspectives in true crime cases. And another challenge question that I should throw back to you guys is, what do you make of this theory that D.B. Cooper would have jumped out of the plane and been using city lights, like talking about the city lights of Portland, Oregon, as a marker? If he can just see anything, then he knows which direction is south, and he would really only need to know about which direction is south so he could tell which direction is north. Someone who was able to scope this out, who was able to gain an understanding of this beforehand, then he can pinpoint where he would have been and try to get to the Columbia River. Then he would be able to get to some type of vehicle that would have been stationed by. And if I've understood the theory that's been laid out by Skip Porteous and Robert Blevins, is that D.B. Cooper would have had an accomplice, and the accomplice's name is Bernie Geisman. He would have been somebody who had a trailer that was arranged to have been used for him and Kenny Christensen, and the trailer was not really used to anyone in the family's knowledge on either side. But what is truly odd is just that there seems to be a lot of interactions between Bernie Geisman and Kenny Christensen that just seem to be suspicious. The D.B. Cooper skyjacking occurred in 1971, but Bernie Geisman and Christensen spent the Thanksgiving of 1970 together and the Thanksgiving of 1972 together, but they were absent for the Thanksgiving of 1971, so that's another cause for suspicion. But as previously stated, I am conflicted about everything. I'm 50-50 on everything because, well, now wait a second. Just because they're spending Thanksgiving together, that doesn't mean that they were D.B. Cooper. Or that, they, meaning that they were both involved with this type of D.B. Cooper skyjacking, just because there was a trailer that was in some type of rural area that was in the possession of somebody, it doesn't mean that that was used for anything in the D.B. Cooper skyjacking, but they are causes for suspicion. However, I'm only about 50% there to believe any type of theory. Another piece of evidence comes to us from Lyle Christensen, Kenny's brother that I mentioned at the beginning, and that is that Kenny Christensen passed away in 1994, and on his deathbed he said that he had something that he wanted to reveal to Lyle, but he was unable to do so. And does that mean that he was D.B. Cooper? Again, I would like to go back to the video from Anthony R.R. Mills, when he just simply said that Kenny Christensen was a lifelong bachelor, he never married, and he believed that it was not anything related to D.B. Cooper. If he were D.B. Cooper and he's on his deathbed, he could just tell his brother that. Instead, he was most likely talking about being a homosexual, and it was rumored that Kenny Christensen was gay, and that was the thing that he actually wanted to tell his brother. And I've noticed in the comments section in various places, some people just think that that would be a bizarre thing to withhold as well. Well, I don't necessarily think so. In 1994, a lot of people would have been uncomfortable becoming, out of the closet and publicly gay, and is that what Kenny Christensen was talking about? I accept that that is a hypothesis and speculative statement on the part of Anthony, but there's a very high chance that that is correct and that's what happened. Because if somebody's just going to admit to being D.B. Cooper, that wouldn't necessarily implicate anybody in Christensen's family like Lyle Christensen. So, I mean, that would not even implicate Bernie Geisman, because if he is just saying that he was D.B. Cooper, people wouldn't have to connect the dots for that entire full package theory to, well, blow up the operation. And none of that happened, by the way. Kenny Christensen did not confess to being D.B. Cooper. He just said that he had something that he wanted to confess, but he was unable to do so, if I've understood the narrative. And I would also like to ask you guys at this time, would you like to hear a full book discussion on Into the Blast by Skip Porteous and Robert Blevins? Do you think that this type of theory is credible? And there are a lot of challenges that people do have to Kenny Christensen as a D.B. Cooper suspect. And one of them is, let's just address it now, the physical appearance. When I'm over on different YouTube channels talking about Kenny Christensen, even on his own Wikipedia page, well, he's on the D.B. Cooper Wikipedia page, but there's a section on Kenny Christensen. It says that Kenny Christensen doesn't match the physical descriptions. And I heard this from not only Anthony R.R. Mills, but also on Drew Beeson's channel. They're talking about how they don't think that Kenny Christensen matches the composite sketches of D.B. Cooper. Now there's Composite A, Composite B, and Composite C. And one thing that I've been able to understand is, if you were to combine these composites together, I would think that it would look like somebody, such as Kenny Christensen. People think that he doesn't match Composite A, the Bing sketch. I think he absolutely does. And when I did the composite sketch analysis episode here on BBOR, I said he might be the strongest match, with one exception. I think that his features are bulkier and larger than Composite A, but he has the pointed chin, the slanted jawline, the ears protruding outward. The thing that is really different is he has a very similar nose shape, but it's just larger. The cheekbones are just larger. All of his facial features just appear to be larger. And I openly said this even when I appeared as a guest on the Cooper Vortex with Darren Schaefer, and I invite you to like and subscribe to his channel. As I said, the Cooper Vortex is my new favorite show. But what I said was, the problem with Composite A is that the nose is almost unnatural. It's extremely narrow, more narrow than what most people would have for the bridge of the nose. And you can see this in Composites B and C, that they just have a wider nose shape, as most people naturally have. Now, Kenny Christensen has a few similarities to Composite B, but with Composite C, which was created by the flight attendant Florence Schaffner for an episode of Unsolved Mysteries in the 1980s, one thing that is extremely different, I repeat, extremely different about Composite C is that the hairline recedes back and comes down into a type of widow's peak. It's a very strong receding hairline, I guess is the more appropriate term. And if you look at some photos of Kenny Christensen, he also had a strong receding hairline. And there was one comment that I heard, actually, that was in the interview I did with Jeremy, that if you put a toupee on Kenny Christensen, then he would heavily, heavily resemble Composites A and B. And that was actually, I think Jeremy got that from Tina Mucklow, the other flight attendant, if I recall, but don't quote me on that one. But the whole point is that if you were to have somebody like Kenny Christensen skyjacking his own airline, someone who had paratrooping experience and thought that maybe he could pull it off but wasn't completely sure, then he puts on a toupee, he wears the wraparound sunglasses, and this is a borderline Clark Kent style disguise. Maybe no one is going to recognize him. He knows about aviation procedures. He knows they're going to comply with the request. He knows that they're going to think that it's a real bomb, or even if they think it's a dud, they're going to go along with it because it is just airplane procedures. He's done this for 17 years, been a flight attendant for 17 years. He knows how they're going to respond. He also would have been very familiar with the geography between Portland and Seattle because he lived in southern Washington, south of Tacoma, in Sumner, Washington. So all of that stuff seems to make sense, but at the same time, did he actually do it? I mean, skyjacking his own airline, not recognized by anybody. I mean, did he actually have the skills to pull this off if he's not really a regular paratrooper? I mean, is he just going to commit to skyjacking, land in the Columbia River, and just go back to work with Northwest Orient Airline for a number of years? I mean, how does all of this get reconciled? Let's talk about some other aspects of the physical appearance. With Kenny Christensen, he was 5 feet 8 inches tall. Is this a strike against him being D.B. Cooper? Mostly. As I said, I think that he heavily, heavily resembles the facial similarities on some of the sketches, on the witness descriptions, and I can even give the allowance that maybe he would have altered his appearance. But D.B. Cooper was reported to have been 5'10", maybe even 6 feet tall. I'm 5 feet 8 inches tall, and I have never once been mistaken for being 6 feet tall. Or I've never been mistaken for being 5 feet 10 inches tall. Most people are able to assess that I'm 5'8", maybe they say 5'7" or 5'9", not even 5'10". So I think that Kenny Christensen is a little bit shorter, and I would even present that as a factual statement, just that the witness descriptions say 5 feet 10 to 6 feet tall, maybe give or take a half inch, depending on which one you're using. But Kenny Christensen was 5'8". The fact of the matter is, he is shorter than the witness descriptions. That's what I would state as a fact. So as I said, I'm just so conflicted with all of this evidence. He seems like somebody who would have had the knowledge to pull this off, somebody who does match some of the physical descriptions, but what about the abilities? Because knowledge and abilities are two very different things. Another piece of evidence is that Kenny Christensen did smoke cigarettes, and he did regularly drink bourbon. He was reported that he liked drinking bourbon, and D.B. Cooper smoked 8 Raleigh cigarettes on the flight, as well as drinking a bourbon and soda. And this is one that I have to give to Anthony R.R. Mills. He said, so would 75% of American males in 1971. They liked drinking bourbon and smoking cigarettes. That really isn't the strongest piece of evidence. But I would also like to give a shout out to Victoria, who wrote into last week's episode talking about the smoking and the cigarettes. And Victoria said something to the effect of, the cigarettes are a nothing burger. Whether D.B. Cooper was a regular smoker or a heavy smoker, if he were committing the skyjacking, he might have been focused on other things. He might have had other things on his mind than smoking cigarettes. So you can't say anything about it. And I want to approach every single statement as an individual statement. Because I've talked about this on the channel before, some people say that they don't think that D.B. Cooper was a regular smoker because he only smoked 8 cigarettes when he was on the plane. It's almost as if he is just pretending to be a smoker, or maybe he knew how to smoke a cigarette, but he wasn't a regular smoker, because if he were, he would have smoked a lot more than 8 cigarettes, and I just called BS on that, saying, no, absolutely not. There could be all types of reasons. You cannot say that he was not a regular smoker because he only smoked 8 cigarettes. Not everybody is an obsessive chain smoker. Not everybody does 3.5 packs a day. Some people might smoke 8 cigarettes over the span of 10 hours or 12 hours or 14 hours. People are different, right? But, however, I would challenge the fact that D.B. Cooper was a chain smoker, and I would even challenge that comment from Victoria that I don't think he was a regular chain smoker, because even under a situation like that, when he has other things on his mind, I think that he would have gone through a lot more cigarettes if he were a regular chain smoker at the time. And to be fair, last week on the channel I was talking about the suspect Robert Richard Lepy, and he is somebody who was a chain smoker. His family was shocked that if he went anywhere without his Chesterfield King cigarettes, he even left half a pack in his car. And Robert Richard Lepy disappeared in 1969, and no one has ever seen him since. But he left behind a half pack of cigarettes, and the family was stunned. They're even searching the area around the car, looking for a trail of cigarette butts, because he was a chain smoker. And I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say, I think that D.B. Cooper was not a chain smoker. I don't think he was a chain smoker, and he was somebody who would have smoked excessively. But that doesn't mean that he was faking it when he was on the plane, that he doesn't regularly smoke cigarettes. I think there's insufficient evidence to support that. And yeah, alright, I can get the whole thing about how they think he's putting on an act. He's trying to look cool. He's got the sunglasses on an airplane, of all things. He's drinking bourbon and soda. He's trying to be like James Bond. Alright, I comprehend all of that, and they think that maybe this guy didn't regularly smoke and regularly drink, and he's just putting on a facade. I comprehend that, but, what if he was an occasional drinker? What if he was an occasional smoker? Those types of things exist. So, maybe it's not a nothing burger in my opinion, but people are making a mountain out of a molehill. But overall, though, what do you think about Kenny Christensen as a DB Cooper suspect? What do you think about these types of observations? And what do you think about the concept of jumping out of the plane, using city lights as a guiding marker so he knows he's somewhere near the Columbia River, and then he's going to go from the Columbia River to a vehicle that may have been driven by an accomplice, and then they're going to do some things with the money in the future? I mean, I take another strong stance on this. I don't believe that D.B. Cooper's motive was financial. I believe it was a thrill. I think the only way you could say that it was financial is if at first he was planning on using the money, then he's thinking, well, wait a second. What if it's traced back to me? Oh, well, I did the skyjacking for nothing. Just holds on to it for 6 years. Not 6 years. That would be 8 or 9 years. And then does the burial at Tina Bar. Alright, if you're going to say something like that, but that would mean that he never actually used the money for anything. And that's ultimately what I would say is, I think that D.B. Cooper did this for the thrill of it, and that he did this to see if he could get away with it, to see if he could just pull this thing off. What do you think about Kenneth Peter Christensen as a D.B. Cooper suspect? And one more time, I would like you to check out my interview that I did with Jeremy Berthium on this channel, and we did the follow-up one, the Zodiac and D.B. Cooper on True Crime Talk Radio, and there are several other D.B. Cooper interviews that I've done, also with Ross Geraci and Stuart McAdam here on this channel. And please put your feedback in the comments section down below. Is there something about Kenny Christensen that you think disqualifies him? Do you think he's a strong D.B. Cooper suspect? And as I said, he's just about mid-level. He might match the facial similarities in my opinion, but I don't think that he was tall enough. He may have had some paratrooping experience, but not enough. He may have had a strong understanding of airplanes, but maybe D.B. Cooper knew more about parachutes. What do you think? Put your ideas in the comments section down below. I would love to read them. One more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe. That will be all for me now. Anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there was always BlackboxNid88 over on Instagram. And I will see you over there. Until next time.